There are stories on Reddit that send chills down your spine, not just because they're dramatic and real, but because they're even scarier than fiction. This is not just a tale of loss and tragedy, but a journey of exposing the truth, standing up to a dangerous manipulator, and reclaiming justice. Today, I'm going to share with you one of the most haunting and intense true Reddit stories, the tragedy of twin sisters, when allergies and jealousy turned family bonds into a fight for survival, shattering an entire family and forcing those involved to choose stay silent or dare to face a brutal truth. If you've ever felt misunderstood, ever had your own family turn their back on you, or felt alone in a crowd, this story will resonate with you. Get ready, because this is a journey where every decision comes at a price, but it's also proof of the power of courage and justice. Chapter 1: Twin Sisters and the Secret Behind. Caring Sarah and I are twins. If you've ever thought that being a twin means you're always close, always understand each other, you might be surprised by this story. Honestly, I used to believe that too. Since we were little, we were the perfect pair in everyone's eyes. Two little girls who looked exactly alike, wore matching outfits, and everywhere we went, people would ask, "Do you ever think the same things? Have you ever gotten mistaken for each other?" I always laughed it off, while Sarah liked to play the role of big sister, even though she was born 3 minutes after me. Our parents were so proud, but everything started to change the day Sarah got sick. At 12 years old, Sarah was diagnosed with celiac disease. It's not a condition everyone understands. To most of the adults in our family, it was something distant and hard to pronounce. They only knew she had to avoid a lot of foods, sometimes got tired, often had stomach aches, and occasionally got frighteningly thin during flare-ups. The whole family rallied to care for Sarah. My grandmother sent gluten-free treats from another state. My mom researched special recipes, and my dad boasted, "Sarah is so strong." Back then, I felt so sorry for my sister. I was willing to give up anything for her, willing to let her win every petty argument, thinking she's already suffering enough. But the shadow of that illness gradually grew between us. I didn't realize when Sarah started to capitalize on her victimhood. Birthday parties, special cakes, just for Sarah. All games had to be safe for her. Even grandma made the whole family eat gluten-free, so everyone could empathize with Sarah. I felt a little sad, but it didn't really bother me. I still thought, well, we're sisters, of course we care for each other. But then over time, I started to notice that for Sarah, being the center of attention was like oxygen. When everyone focused on school, Sarah would bring up her illness. When I got a good grade, Sarah would talk about her latest hospital visit. I didn't see anything wrong with it until I turned 16. That was when I discovered I had a tree nut allergy, a serious one, the kind that can cause anaphylactic shock if not treated immediately. The first time I had an allergic reaction, I was genuinely terrified, but thankfully the EpiPen saved me. But even in that moment, I noticed something strange in Sarah's eyes. It wasn't worry. It was something closer to annoyance, jealousy, and distance. The story of me and my twin sister isn't a gentle ballad about understanding and sharing. It started with something seemingly small who gets more attention. And as you'll see, it ends with things no one in my family could ever have imagined. Chapter 2: When Illness Becomes a Weapon. After my first hospitalization due to a tree nut allergy, life at home was no longer peaceful as before. Maybe to outsiders, having two sisters with chronic illnesses seemed normal. Everyone gets sick, sometimes they'd say. But for Sarah, it wasn't that simple. She couldn't hide her irritation, even though on the outside, she still played the gentle big sister. I remember the first time Mom took me to see the allergist, Sarah sat in the back seat, eyes glued to her phone. When the doctor talked about the severity of my condition and the things I needed to avoid, Sarah snorted and scoffed. On the way home, she leaned over and said quietly, Careful people will think you're just trying to copy me. I thought she was joking, but there was nothing funny in her eyes. I started carrying my EpiPen to school, always wore a medical bracelet, and was much more cautious with unfamiliar foods. But Sarah seemed deeply bothered by all the attention I was getting. Once, when I packed my own nut-free lunch, Sarah looked into my lunchbox and sneered, "Wow, what an excuse to skip the cafeteria food. You really think everyone believes you?" I thought maybe she was just being petty, but over time things got out of hand. Sarah began telling my friends that I like to exaggerate things just to get attention. At family gatherings, whenever I refused food that might trigger my allergy, Sarah would announce loudly, "He's so sensitive, everyone. You better remember, or she'll throw a fit." I would force a laugh, pretending not to care, but inside, I felt like a little kid being mocked in front of the whole family. Gradually, Sarah turned everything into a cruel joke. She started swapping my medical bracelet for cheap jewelry. The worst was when I discovered my bracelet had been switched as I was on my way to school. When I asked her, Sarah shrugged and said, "You wear it so much, no one believes it's real anyway." She even went through my medicine box, and every time she did, she'd smirk in front of my friends. She just brings that for show. I doubt she'd actually dare use it. It didn't stop there. Sarah told Mom that I was always whining and making a big deal out of nothing, and she gossiped to friends that I was just trying to steal the spotlight. To the adults, Sarah was still the brave girl overcoming her illness. As for me, despite my real fear of allergic reactions, I was seen as the one playing the victim. The whispers, the doubtful looks from relatives slowly closed in on me. I started to wonder, am I really just being dramatic? Do I just want attention, like Sarah says? But what I didn't know was that this was only the beginning. Sarah wasn't just playing mind games. That was when I realized illness was no longer just a fear. It had become a weapon in the hands of the person who used to be my closest twin sister. Chapter 3: When Doubt Becomes an Obsession. I used to think everything would settle down once the family got used to my dietary restrictions, but I was far too naive. With each passing day, I realized that Sarah had no intention of letting me off the hook. In fact, she seemed determined to push things even further. Sarah's jealousy was no longer just snide remarks. It had become a true obsession. Sarah started watching my every move at school. Every time I checked the food labels, she'd mock me loudly. "See, if you really had an illness, you wouldn't have to check so carefully. I can eat anything." She'd say it loud enough for the whole class to hear, shooting me a triumphant look. There were days I went hungry because I wasn't sure if the food was safe. But whenever I mentioned my allergy, Sarah would chime in front of my friends. "Why bother? She acts like everyone wants to know about her problems." Strangely, the more I tried to avoid talking about my allergy, the more attention I drew, but not the caring kind, only irritated looks. I remember one time my mom made cookies and set aside a tray, without nuts, just for me. Sarah quietly slipped into the kitchen, then came out and whispered, "Why don't you try this cookie and see if you really die?" I stared at her, shocked, wanting to believe it was just a cruel joke. But deep down, I felt a crack forming inside me. After that, I checked my food even more carefully, not because I feared the allergy, but because I feared my own sister. It got to the point where Sarah would deliberately hand me nut-free foods that later turned out to have weird oil stains or odd smells. Once I had a mild allergic reaction after eating a cake Sarah had prepared and had to take medicine in the bathroom. When I told my mom, Sarah just laughed. There she goes again. This script is getting old, and she still isn't bored of acting it out. The worst part was when Sarah straight up told our parents that I was causing the allergic reactions myself for attention. She insisted I was just copying her, just wanted to stand out. Gradually, the whole family started siding with Sarah. My dad quietly told me, "Try to be more open with your sister. She's under a lot of pressure too." My mom sighed. "Maybe you're just a little too sensitive." No one believed me even when they saw me swollen and struggling to breathe after dinner. I slowly sank into confusion. I began journaling every symptom, every allergic reaction, every word Sarah said. But the more I wrote, the more I felt like I was losing my mind. I went to bed anxious, woke up dreading what might happen that day. Sometimes I wondered, am I the one with the psychological problem Sarah was like, a shadow always lurking, waiting for any slip, so she could push me deeper into the pit of doubt. That's when I began to realize my allergy wasn't the real threat haunting me every day. It was the silent manipulation of the sister I used to trust the most. Chapter 4: When Illness Becomes a Power Game. There were days when I wished everything would just stop at cruel jokes, but Sarah, or rather the new version of her, seemed to take daily pleasure in controlling and tearing me down. Gradually, my allergy stopped being just a health issue. It became a pawn in the power game Sarah was playing. I remember so clearly the first time I discovered my medical bracelet had been swapped for a cheap charm. It was a rushed morning before school. I hurriedly stuffed my lunchbox into my backpack, slipped on my silver bracelet, only to realize it was a fake. The words "tree nut allergy" gone, replaced by a tacky best friend forever. I glanced at Sarah, and she just shrugged, completely unfazed. Don't make such a fuss. Everyone likes cute things better. I didn't know whether to be angry, scared, or laugh. All I knew was my heart tightened, so my safety was just a game to her. At school, Sarah kept up her act with teachers and friends. She would help herself to my EpiPen box, then openly announce to the class she just likes the attention. Who knows if she'd actually use it? Everyone burst out laughing. I, embarrassed, just bit my tongue. I didn't want to give anyone more reason to talk. Every time I refused a dish or checked labels carefully, Sarah would sneer, "So picky. No wonder no one invites you out to eat." She even advised me to stop being so paranoid, or nobody's going to want to hang out with you. I knew the more I resisted, the worse things would get. So I tried to get used to always being watched, not just by my sister, but by everyone around me. But things didn't stop there. Sarah started doing scarier things. She'd secretly slip nut-free snacks into my backpack, but I'd later find traces of almond oil. One time she made tea and shoved it into my hand, saying, "Drink up. I'm sure there's nothing in it." But I tasted something odd and spat it out just in time. Sarah burst out laughing, then whispered, "So only I could hear you play the victim so well. If I were an Oscar judge, you'd win." Every day I had to watch out, not just for allergies, but for Sarah's latest tricks. Sometimes I felt like I was living in a B-rate horror movie, except the villain was my own sister. The most painful part was the helplessness of not being believed. Once I had an allergic reaction after eating a cookie at a school birthday party. Sarah was right there watching me scramble for my EpiPen, then turning to our friends. "See, she's acting again like she's in some TV drama." The first time I was hospitalized for anaphylactic shock, Sarah didn't hesitate to tell the doctor. She probably ate it on purpose to see if anyone cares. She even posted Instagram stories hinting that I had Munchausen syndrome, like I was faking illness for attention. My family was the same. My parents didn't know who to believe. They just quietly told me, "Don't be too sensitive," while Sarah grew bolder and more relentless. I felt trapped in a nightmare loop, with no way out, where every effort to protect myself only became another excuse for ridicule and contempt. What I never imagined was this: Sarah wouldn't stop at these dangerous games. She was willing to do anything to keep her victim's crown, even if it meant pushing me to the very edge of death. Chapter 5: Graduation Dinner and the Price of Doubt. I thought everything would change once I left high school. I was looking forward to a fresh start, a place where no one knew me as Sarah's twin, where no one cared about stories of illness, allergies, or petty arguments. But all that hope was shattered in one night, the night that was supposed to be the happiest moment of my youth. It was our graduation dinner. My family, close friends, even some teachers, everyone was cheerful and excited. The whole table was filled with laughter, childhood stories, and well wishes for the future. I kept reminding myself to be careful. Before ordering, I proactively told the waiter about my allergy. I hadn't had any serious issues for months. Everything seemed under control, but still, I couldn't predict what Sarah would do that night. In a moment when I turned away, I saw Sarah whispering something to the server, even showing him her phone. I didn't think much of it, assuming she was just picking dessert. But when the food arrived, the moment I tasted the sauce, I noticed something strange. My throat started to burn. A tingling sensation spread to my lips and down my neck. I immediately knew something was wrong. I tried to get up, but my head spun and everything blurred. I heard people screaming, chairs crashing, and somewhere in the chaos, Sarah crying. Part of me was still trying to reach for my EpiPen, but my hands were shaking violently. Someone shouted for an ambulance. I collapsed on the floor, my throat tightening as if being strangled. In that moment, I caught a glimpse of Sarah's eyes, still cold, with a hint of satisfaction. When I woke up in the hospital, I heard a nurse whisper that my heart had stopped for 47 seconds. The doctor said if help had come a little later, I wouldn't have survived. Meanwhile, Sarah sat next to my parents, tears streaming down her face, telling the doctor over and over I told her not to eat anything weird. I was afraid she'd do this just for attention. I silently looked at my sister, a chill running through me, as I realized for Sarah my life was just another scene in a play she wanted to control. During my days in the hospital, I had to listen to my parents' comforting words. Sarah was so worried about you. She cried and couldn't eat. But only I knew Sarah had told the waiter that I wasn't really allergic, just overreacting. That server later admitted to me that he only followed Sarah's instructions, believing her, because she was my sister. I realized that if I kept staying silent, I would forever be a supporting character in my own life, while Sarah by any means would never stop. Chapter 6. No longer a victim. I left the hospital after that incident with a weakened body, but my mind was nothing like before. During all those days staring up at the blank white ceiling, I kept asking myself the same question. If I died, would anyone speak the truth for me? And I knew the answer, no one would. Sarah would keep crying, playing the devoted little sister, and everyone would only remember me as someone who exaggerated for attention. From that moment on, I decided I would no longer be Sarah's victim. I started by keeping my distance from my sister. No more sharing everything, no more twin sisters who do everything together. Quietly, I changed my habits, always checking every dish myself, never accepting anything from Sarah without scrutinizing it first. I also made a point to cut down on appearing with her at family gatherings or group outings. If anyone asked, I simply smiled and said I'm busy these days. I decided to dig deeper into allergies, into the mechanics of anaphylaxis, into everything related to my condition. I read hundreds of articles, joined online support groups, talked to doctors, and taught myself how to recognize, manage, and prevent risks. Strangely enough, the more I understood my illness, the more in control I felt, no longer afraid or powerless like before. Sarah, of course, wasn't happy about these changes. She started telling relatives that I'd become cold and distant, that I was trying to make myself seem more special. Yeah, but this time I didn't react. I let Sarah say whatever she wanted, let family gossip behind my back. My silence only made Sarah more uncomfortable. But I knew I couldn't win by playing psychological games with my sister. Instead, I quietly observed, recording every incident, any detail that could become evidence. I also began building new relationships outside my family and old friends, people who didn't know or care about the famous sick twin sisters story in town. With them, I could be myself, not Sarah's poor copy, not the perpetual victim, and definitely not someone always having to defend things I hadn't done. I realized that if I wanted to survive and truly live, I had to stand up and protect my own truth. And I also understood that someday Sarah would have to face the consequences of everything she had done. I wasn't afraid anymore. From now on, I would be the one deciding the story of my life. Chapter 7. Beginning the journey to uncover the truth. Ever since I decided not to be a victim anymore, I lived with a new purpose, exposing the truth. But I soon realized not everyone is ready to listen. Most people were far too accustomed to Sarah's flawless performance. In their eyes, my sister was both pitiable and strong, always considerate of others. For me, the harder I tried to prove I was right, the more I was labeled with ugly names. Jealous, unstable, always looking for trouble. I started with the smallest things. Every time Sarah did something suspicious, I wrote it down in a secret notebook. Whenever she checked my medication, touched my food, or when I had an unexplained allergic reaction. I recorded everything down to the day and hour. At first, it was just to remind myself to stay alert. But the more I documented, the more I realized this was a map of all the times Sarah had experimented on me. I also began to pay attention to the stories around me, strange allergy incidents at parties Sarah hosted at the club, rumors about girls at school, having reactions after eating or drinking things my sister prepared. Some whispered about it, but no one was brave enough to speak out. They were afraid of being seen as paranoid, afraid of losing friends, or simply didn't want to get involved in the drama between the two of us. So I took the initiative to reach out to each person. At first they refused, hesitated, even avoided me, but I didn't give up. I sent messages, asked, gently shared what I had been through. After many persistent attempts, finally 2 people agreed to meet. When they heard my story, they opened up, and then piece by piece, memories started to fit together, painting a disturbing picture. One friend told me about almost ending up in the hospital after eating cake Sarah made at a birthday party, even though she only had a mild nut allergy and was always careful. Another remembered feeling isolated, accused of making things up just because she wouldn't eat something Sarah cooked. I realized Sarah hadn't just played with me, she had turned control over illness into a hidden form of power over those around her. I began building a secret file, my own journal, conversations, messages, photos of food that had a strange taste, even event schedules for Sarah's parties, and a list of other victims who'd had allergic reactions. I researched the law, looked into cases of people intentionally endangering others through food. The deeper I dug, the more serious everything became. Of course, Sarah wasn't stupid. She started to sense a change in me. Sometimes she tried to probe, even pretending to be friendly, spending hours reminiscing about the past, but I was too familiar with those tricks. I kept my cool, smiled politely, and never revealed anything about my plan. What surprised me was that the more evidence I collected, the lonelier I felt. A once close friend even advised me to stop, afraid I was just making myself miserable over things no one wants to talk about. But I couldn't turn back. I knew clearly if I stayed silent, not just me, but many others would continue to be victims in Sarah's sickness game. And then one day, as I pieced together all the fragments, I realized it was time to turn all that data into something truly valuable. No more private journals, no more half-told stories. This would be a file, real evidence that could finally bring Sarah's actions into the light. Chapter 8. When the world turns its back. I used to think that if I just had enough evidence, the truth would win. I never imagined that the road to exposing the truth would be so lonely and full of thorns. My first step was to try talking to my parents. I brought them everything I had collected, my journal photos, messages, hoping they would finally see the problem. But my parents just looked at me with tired, pitying eyes. Dad said, "Sweetie, have you ever considered that you might be too sensitive? Sarah has her own issues too." Mom sighed and told me not to dig any deeper, that the family was already in enough turmoil. I had nothing left to say. I just took back my stack of documents, feeling as if I'd just been handed a death sentence for daring to trust. Sarah, of course, didn't just sit back. She skillfully spread rumors that I was obsessed overreacting and causing drama in the family, just to stand out. At family gatherings, she continued to play her perfect role, comforting our parents, inviting my old friends out for dinner, posting happy family photos on social media. One day, I even read mocking comments under her posts. Some people just love to stir up drama with their twin. Some are genuinely sick, not like others. I knew exactly who they were talking about, not only at home, but also in society. I started to feel the isolation. A childhood friend who once shared everything with me suddenly changed after having dinner with Sarah. She sent me a short message. "I think you need to rest for a while. Don't let your illness affect your mind." Those who once promised to help me now all fell silent, refused to meet, even blocked my number. Even at my part-time job, I ran into trouble. A coworker whispered behind my back, "She really seems mentally unstable." My manager called me in and asked bluntly, Are you bringing family issues to work? No one here wants to get involved in your drama. I started to fear myself. Every night I lay awake, turning over each piece of evidence, every story questioning whether I was suffering from shared delusions as everyone claimed. There were moments when I wanted to give up, to pack everything away in a corner and pretend none of it had ever happened. But every time I saw the small scars on my skin, remembered the suffocating panic of not being able to breathe on that restaurant floor, the anger flared up again. Not anger at Sarah, but at myself for letting my story be twisted by someone else, for almost believing the lies. Lonely as it was, I understood only I could save myself. I refused to stop even if the whole world turned its back, even if people looked at me with pity, suspicion, or indifference. The truth had to come out. Otherwise, everything I'd endured would be for nothing. Chapter 9. The Decision to Step into the Light. In the days after realizing I had no one left on my side, I lived like a sleepwalker. Everything became blurry, missed calls from my parents, curt messages from friends, the uneasy glances of people who used to be close. All of it only made me more determined. I knew there was no turning back. I spent hours at my desk, eyes fixed on yellowed notebooks, folders of photos, chat logs, and fragmented testimonies I'd carefully collected over nearly 2 years. Each detail was a piece of the bigger picture, one that exposed Sarah's manipulation and crimes. I started organizing everything systematically. Dates, witnesses, locations, recurring allergy incidents, even the times Sarah changed event schedules at the last minute, all filed neatly into thick dossiers. I knew that with a single click, I could send all this evidence to a lawyer, to the club's board of directors, or even blast it onto social media. But every time I hovered the mouse over the send button, I hesitated. Part of me still hoped, is there any way to fix this so things don't have to end so horribly? Every night I tossed and turned, wrestling with my fears. What if no one believes me even now? What if my family falls apart because I dared to tell the truth? And Sarah, no matter what she had done, she was still my twin. Was I truly ready to destroy her life? I confided my worries to an old friend, one who had seen Sarah's treatment of me throughout our childhood. She didn't say much, just messaged back, "If you don't do it, how many more will suffer like you did?" That line kept echoing in my mind until I could no longer distinguish her voice from my own conscience. I thought of the other victims, the friends who had quietly stepped away from Sarah's orbit, the kids who nearly lost their lives to almond cookies disguised as wheat, the girls once branded as attention seekers. In the end, I realized silence is a form of complicity. If I stepped back, just because I was afraid I'd be no different from those who once turned their backs on me. One morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The autumn sky was foggy sunlight glinting off the window. I told myself, it's time. I gathered all the evidence, made 3 copies, one for the lawyer, one for the club board, and one more just in case things spun out of control. I also messaged the 2 victims who'd agreed to speak up, asking if they were still willing to stand with me. My heart pounded as I hit send. Relief and fear washed over me in waves. I knew that from this moment, nothing would ever be the same. And I also knew this was only the beginning of a true battle. Chapter 10. A Wedding in the Storm of Truth. Sarah's wedding day unfolded exactly as she had dreamed since childhood. Luxurious, dazzling, with over 300 guests, friends, relatives, business partners, all the people who once praised the family's golden girl, now in attendance. Sarah appeared in a spotless white wedding dress, her smile radiant, her eyes shining as if to announce to the world that at last every spotlight belonged to her. I was there too, sitting quietly in a corner, my mind racing with hundreds of thoughts and a nameless fear. Beside me was a thick folder of documents, recordings, testimonies, journals, and photographs no one wanted to see again. I was still trembling, even though I'd told myself this was the moment to face the truth, not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever been a victim. The party was lively, people raising their glasses, toasting, taking photos. But I noticed a few unfamiliar guests, legal representatives, club staff, and those who had agreed to support me. Everyone was silent eyes, darting around as if waiting for a secret signal. As the music faded, Sarah and her groom stepped up to cut the wedding cake. That was when I felt my heartbeat soar. A police officer quietly appeared by the door. Further away, an investigator stood with a stack of documents in hand. The room's atmosphere suddenly turned cold. Then a voice rang out over the loudspeaker announcing an emergency food safety inspection. Sarah froze, eyes wide, her smile frozen in place. Club staff stepped forward and announced a series of unusual allergic reactions at events Sarah had organized over the past 5 years. The victims began to stand, some trembling, some unable to hold back tears, each confirming the painful experiences they had once tried to forget. I stood as well, reading aloud passages from my journal, presenting photos and audio evidence showing that Sarah had deliberately altered foods, adding allergens despite knowing the risks. The room fell into a deathly silence. A few guests stood with mouths agape. Others whispered in shock. The groom looked at Sarah with no trace of trust left in his eyes. My mother wept, while my father could only hold his head in his hands, shaking. Sarah broke down sobbing, trying to explain, but every word only made the atmosphere more suffocating. The officer read out a summons. I clearly heard the cold clink of handcuffs amid the splendor of the wedding. Sarah was led away, still turning to the crowd, repeating, "I just wanted to protect everyone. I just wanted to do good. They're making it up. Everyone's jealous of me." Some guests were stunned. Some were angry. Others pitied Sarah. Some turned to look at me, eyes full of both fear and gratitude. I stood there feeling every emotion in me crash at once: relief, guilt, pain, and finally, liberation. I knew I had lost many things, friends, peace, even a part of my family, but I also knew for the first time in my life I had truly chosen truth and justice, no matter how high the price. Chapter 11, The Fragments. After the storm, after that fateful wedding, it felt like everything had completely collapsed. My family fell into a chaos we'd never known before. My mother was nearly broken, crying, constantly repeating over and over, "How did it come to this?" My father grew withdrawn and silent, sometimes just sitting and staring at a childhood photo of the two of us. His eyes red. I knew whether I liked it or not. I was the one who had torn the perfect mask from my family's face. Sarah was held in custody, awaiting investigation, and was required to attend psychiatric evaluations. Several victims filed civil lawsuits, and the club where Sarah once worked rushed to overhaul all their food safety protocols, organizing training sessions for staff. The press covered it as the city's biggest food allergy scandal, while social media erupted in fierce debates. Some argued that Sarah was just a victim of mental illness and needed treatment, not punishment. Others condemned her, harshly demanding strict consequences for someone who treated other people's lives as a game. For me, the days after the wedding were a mix of relief and emptiness. I received all kinds of messages, thank yous, criticism, even threats. Some people who once turned their backs now sent apologies. But just as many old friends cut me off completely, some blocking my number, others blocking me on social media. They believed I had destroyed the whole family just to get attention. Even at home, nothing felt whole. Dinner was just the sound of clinking dishes. No one looked anyone in the eye. Some relatives even avoided our family altogether, embarrassed by the scandal. I remembered all the times I'd wondered if I was the one with the problem. But now I understood there are prices you cannot avoid when you choose the path of truth. The one thing that gave me strength was seeing the recovery of other victims. They sent me long messages sharing their feelings, even forming a support group to help each other heal from the trauma. I was surprised to receive an invitation to collaborate with an organization that protects victims of food-related crimes. The new job gave me a chance to help people like myself, not just so they wouldn't be alone, but so the truth would never again be buried in silence. As for Sarah, I heard she was gradually accepting mandatory psychiatric treatment with no chance of returning to her old job and was restricted from interacting with outsiders. Part of me still felt sorry for her, but mostly I felt a sense of calm. I no longer blamed her, maybe because after everything I realized no one is born evil. Sarah was just a damaged person, haunted and desperate for validation. What happened can never be changed. My family will never be the same. Chapter 12, Light After Loss. It's been 2 years since that fateful wedding day. My life has slowly settled into a new rhythm, but the cracks left behind remain impossible to erase, only something I've learned to live with. I moved to another city, started over with a new job, new friends, and the small daily habits that help me feel a little safer every day. Whenever I look at old photos, two twin sisters as children, smiling under the summer sun, I can't help but wonder, how did things go so far? If only I had been stronger from the start. If my family had listened, if Sarah had faced the truth about herself, maybe we'd still be two inseparable sisters. I've spent many months in therapy learning to forgive myself for everything that happened, for what I did, and for what I wasn't brave enough to do sooner. Some nights I dream of Sarah, not the cruel sister from the final years, but the timid little girl who always clung to me. Sometimes I miss her, even knowing that this distance between us may never truly be bridged. Still, I have no regrets. If I could choose again, I would still choose to speak up, even if it meant facing all the consequences. The truth, as painful as it is the only thing that can save not only myself, but others from the endless cycle of harm. My new job isn't just about helping victims of food allergies. It has also helped me realize that every story I listen to is another piece of the journey toward justice, toward healing. Sometimes we have to become the one who breaks the silence, even if it costs us loneliness or loss, because if not, silence will swallow everything. I still keep one single photo, the two of us on graduation day one, smaller from celiac disease one, clutching a tiny EpiPen. That was the last time I truly felt I had a complete family. Since then, I've understood sometimes growing up isn't about forgiving every mistake, but about protecting the truth, protecting yourself, and daring to accept that some wounds will never heal the way they once were. My life has turned to a new chapter, and though there are still lingering aches, I am no longer a victim of my past. I know that somewhere in the world, there are others like me, and I will keep speaking up for them and for myself. And that's the whole story, a long journey, not just to seek justice, but to heal wounds that may never fully disappear. I've lost so much family friends and the beautiful illusions of what family could be. But in return, I've gained freedom, freedom from manipulation, freedom from the constant fear I once lived with every day. Maybe not everyone will believe the truth. Maybe there will always be rumors, blame, and empty spaces that can never be filled. But I know that as long as there is even one more person brave enough to speak up, more people can be saved from the spiral of pain. If you're listening to this story and feel a connection, don't hesitate to share your own experience. Remember, sometimes it only takes one person daring to speak the truth for an entire system of lies to crumble. Thank you for listening to the very end. This is True Reddit Reads, where hidden truths finally get a voice.